Some serial killers stalk alleys, others hide in plain sight, behind name tags, trucker hats, or family cookouts. The 5 men in this story were all born and bred in the US, and yet they hunted their fellow Americans like prey in a game they never wanted to end. They didn't kill for survival. They killed for the ritual, the method, the thrill, the cleanup. These weren't crimes of passion. They were cold, calculated performances, staged with rope, bleach, pliers, and time. Before I tell you what's coming next, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there. Because if these men walked your streets once, you should be cautious. He was called Tucker because of the way he always tucked his shirt in, no matter what, into coveralls, into jeans, into the waistband of his pajama pants. Even as a child in Springdale, Arkansas, Thomas Merrick was obsessed with neatness, not hygiene, but control. He would iron his bed sheets every morning at age 8, line his school pencils by descending length, and rearrange the silverware drawer in other people's homes when invited over. But there was something else behind his tidy compulsions: silence. When he was 9, his older brother bled out in the family barn after falling on a broken fence rail. Tucker found him, watched him twitch, didn't scream, didn't cry. He just covered the boy's face with his own pressed Sunday shirt and cleaned up the blood with hay. When his parents came looking, he calmly told them, "He's not cold anymore." They thought it was shock, but it wasn't. It was the beginning. Tucker went unnoticed through high school, not bullied, not admired, just there. He graduated with a near-perfect GPA, joined a warehouse job, and rented a small trailer behind a junkyard. There, he began collecting things: carpet remnants, bleach bottles, lengths of plastic sheeting, gloves, knives, and shackles. He didn't date, he didn't drink, but he watched people, especially young men who lived alone, moved often, and had no local ties. His victims weren't chosen out of rage. They were chosen because no one would come looking too soon. His first known kill was Jeremy Langston, a 24-year-old substitute teacher who had moved to Fayetteville for work. Tucker spotted him in the checkout line at a dollar store, noticed his thin wrists, his tired eyes, and the way he hesitated when asked if he wanted a bag. He followed Jeremy home, waited 3 days, and on the 4th, knocked on his door, dressed as a pest control agent. Jeremy, distracted and trusting, let him in. The moment the door closed, Tucker struck with a taser, binding his limbs with zip ties and taping his mouth shut. He placed a hand gently on Jeremy's chest and whispered, "Don't worry, I clean up." The next 12 hours were methodical torture: shallow incisions on the arms, precise nerve strikes on the thighs, and injections of adrenaline to prolong consciousness. Tucker didn't scream. He didn't gloat. He just watched. When Jeremy finally stopped twitching, Tucker slit the throat, drained the blood into a child's swimming pool lined with plastic, and rolled the body in an old carpet. He left no fingerprints, no fibers, no blood traces in the apartment. Everything, every trace, was carried back to the trailer and burned in a barrel he'd modified with air vents and fan-forced heat. Bones were shattered with a mallet and fed to wild dogs he'd been keeping behind the junkyard with poisoned meat. Jeremy Langston was declared a missing person, assumed a drifter. Over the next 4 years, Tucker killed 7 more men. Each murder followed a similar routine: gain access with a fake job or borrowed uniform, subdue, torture with surgical precision, bleed out, cremate in barrel, destroy teeth and bone, feed remains to wildlife, or scatter in construction sites. His tools evolved, from box cutters to bone saws, from plastic zip ties to handmade clamps with locking gears. He kept every ID card neatly sealed in labeled Ziploc bags. His journal entries were chilling in their neatness. Subject number 4, strong vocal cords, screamed 27 minutes, broke windpipe manually, not efficient, use smaller blade next time. The police had no suspects, different counties, different missing persons, no connection. It wasn't until his ninth victim, Tyler Holmes, a 31-year-old IT contractor, that Tucker made a mistake. He'd grown bolder, sloppier. When disposing of Tyler's laptop, he simply tossed it into a flooded ditch, assuming water damage would do the trick. It didn't. The device was found during drainage cleanup and sent to forensics, where a deleted folder was partially recovered. It included a photo of Tucker's trailer, taken accidentally by Tyler. The image showed a man in the background, partially visible, but enough for facial matching software to flag Tucker Merrick. Police executed a search warrant. At first glance, the trailer was spotless, but hidden beneath the false bottom of a storage cabinet, they found the Ziploc archive, 8 driver's licenses, several blood-stained rags, and a hand-drawn diagram of a body with X's marked on nerve points. Tucker was arrested without struggle. When asked why he did it, he simply replied, "They didn't scream right." At trial, the jury recoiled at the photos. The prosecutor described him as a human scalpel. Tucker showed no remorse. He requested a tape recorder for his final statement, insisting it be perfectly edited. It wasn't allowed. He was convicted on multiple counts of murder and sentenced to life without parole. In prison, he became an obsessive janitor, cleaning the same floor 10 times a day. He spoke to no one. He tucked in his shirt even as he mopped. But what disturbed guards most wasn't his silence. It was that every time someone else was transferred to his block, that person would beg to be moved within a week. The arrest of Thomas Tucker Merrick shocked local law enforcement not just for the scope of his crimes, but for the surgical precision with which they had been carried out across nearly half a decade without detection. His trailer, upon deeper investigation, was less a living space and more a kill lab disguised with domestic camouflage, a rollaway cot, unopened canned goods, and a refrigerator that held nothing but distilled water and cotton swabs. But beneath a trap door, crime scene technicians found the true chamber, a soundproofed cellar lined with steel hooks, blood drains camouflaged as plumbing, and a series of custom-built fixtures designed to suspend a human body in mid-air for prolonged manipulation. In one cabinet were rows of sharpened tools, pliers filed to scalpel-like edges, repurposed veterinary equipment, syringes with black market paralytics, and a spray bottle labeled "Ammonia, do not inhale." Tucker had documented everything, not in a frenzy, but with the detail of a man building a legacy. His handwritten journals stretched across 14 composition books, each labeled by year and bound with plastic covers to prevent smudging. In them, he recorded victim reactions, biological thresholds for pain tolerance, and how different methods of dismemberment affected post-mortem muscle rigidity. FBI behavioral analysts called it one of the most disturbingly clinical cases in American forensic history. What chilled them further was his apathy. During interviews, Tucker never once tried to justify his actions. He didn't mention childhood trauma, religious delusions, or ideological motives. When asked why he had chosen to kill men in particular, his answer was unsettlingly simple. They were lighter to carry, and no one notices when they vanish. His detachment was total. He described each kill as a project, each body as a material test, and each cleanup as performance hygiene. His calm unnerved even the most seasoned interrogators. At one point, when shown photos of his victims' families, he tilted his head and asked, "Do they miss them, or just the idea of them?" Prosecutors scrambled to collect evidence from across counties, coordinating with missing persons units, animal control, and even illegal dogfighting rings to trace where remains had ended up. Investigators found fragments of bones, pulverized and mixed into asphalt at a rural roadwork site where Tucker had posed as a night laborer, and 2 molars embedded in concrete he'd poured as part of a fake foundation project behind a junkyard wall. But despite the overwhelming evidence, he refused to enter a plea. He wanted trial, not for a platform, but to see the reaction when it all lined up. During the proceedings, which lasted 31 days, Tucker sat emotionless as autopsy photos, audio recordings, and witness testimonies painted a timeline of horror. One by one, families of the missing stared at him, hoping for acknowledgement. He gave none. When asked if he had any final words before sentencing, he stood, adjusted his tucked shirt, and said only, "I always made the bed when I was done." The judge sentenced him to 8 consecutive life terms without parole, but the true punishment may have been what came after. In prison, Tucker was held in solitary for 23 hours a day, yet somehow, 2 inmates in adjacent cells went missing within his first month. One was found, unconscious, with his tongue nearly severed by a toothbrush shank and bleach burns on his lips. The other was never fully recovered, only a trail of blood and a note in Tucker's handwriting left in the communal shower. Not clean enough. The prison warden transferred him to a federal supermax facility, where he now resides under 24-hour camera surveillance, denied all physical materials beyond a rubber pen and sanitized paper. Still, once a month, guards report finding neatly folded tissues arranged in strange patterns across his cell floor, always symmetrical, always in sets of 8. Behavioral scientists continue to study his case for insights into compulsive killers who exhibit no delusions, no empathy, and no remorse. The rare type who doesn't kill for chaos, but for the purity of process. Tucker's legacy remains a stain on the FBI's timeline, a man who turned murder into ritual, pain into record-keeping, and silence into a scream no one could hear until it was far too late. Tucker Merrick left behind no screams, no visible wounds, only questions about what a man becomes when emotion is stripped away and all that's left is ritual. But not every killer is that clean. Some don't wait for silence. They create noise. They chase fear, chaos, and confrontation. And unlike Tucker, they don't hide from it. They walk through it, dragging bodies behind them like shadows that refuse to vanish. Our next killer didn't disappear after each murder. In fact, he made sure someone always saw. Because for him, being feared was just a side effect of being seen. His real name was Everett Delaney, but no one ever called him that. By the time he turned 14 in rural Pennsylvania, his family, classmates, and even juvenile court judges were calling him Jacko, a nickname that stuck after he knocked out a teacher's front teeth with a stapler and laughed like it was a joke. He was institutionalized at 16, released at 18, and by 23, he had spent more time in detention than in any home that loved him. Jacko had a simple rule. If you made him feel small, he'd make you feel pain. That rule followed him into adulthood, where he bounced between jobs as a bouncer, debt collector, and occasional dog fighter, until eventually he found his favorite trade, being the man people called when they needed someone disappeared. He didn't just kill people. He didn't just dispose of them. He choreographed every step of their final moments with a psychological malice that made even hardened criminals afraid to cross him. His victims weren't random. They were selected through whispers. Someone who owed too much money, someone who snitched, someone who got loud about the wrong deal. But it wasn't until 1994 that Jacko started killing for himself, when a parole officer named Marsha Lane mocked him during a mandatory session, calling him a wasted second chance. That night, Jacko followed her home in a beat-up Buick with no plates, waited until she put her baby to bed, and knocked on her door dressed as a pizza delivery man. When she opened the door with confusion, saying she hadn't ordered anything, he smiled and said, "That's all right, it's on me." Then he shoved the box into her face. It was empty, and broke her nose with the corner. He dragged her into her own bathroom, zip-tied her limbs, gagged her with her child's sock, and turned the shower on cold. She bled to death slowly, her wounds shallow but constant, her strength drained by shock and exposure. Jacko left the baby unharmed, untouched, asleep in the crib. The only thing he took was a piece of the bathroom mirror, snapped into a jagged crescent and pocketed like a trophy. From that night on, Jacko's kills escalated. He called them reminders, not to himself, to everyone else. He wanted every victim's death to make someone else sweat. Over the next 5 years, his signature became notorious in underground circles. One finger removed post-mortem, always from the left hand and wrapped in duct tape like a cigarette butt. He'd leave them behind, tucked into car ashtrays, desk drawers, shoeboxes, always where someone close would find it. His message was simple: that could have been yours. Authorities struggled to link the killings. Most of his victims had criminal backgrounds, enemies, and no reason for police to prioritize them. But Jacko didn't care about staying invisible. He wanted the stories to travel. And they did. When a small-time drug runner named Mikey Slips Cordell was found hung from his own shower curtain rod, drained of blood, and posed upright on the toilet with a Polaroid taped to his chest, showing his mutilated finger held between Jacko's teeth, it wasn't just a kill, it was theater. And Jacko was the director. His weapon of choice varied. He'd use kitchen knives, hammers, bricks, crowbars. But the endgame was always psychological. He wanted his victims to die knowing they had no power, no hope, no prayer. Surveillance footage finally caught him in 1999, not during a murder, but after one. He had left a building in Pittsburgh covered in blood, smiling at the doorman like nothing had happened. When police raided the apartment upstairs, they found the body of a club promoter sliced open from navel to neck, his own belt wrapped around his tongue. A single phrase had been etched into his stomach: "Now I'm loud." Jacko was arrested 6 blocks away, calmly eating fries at a diner. When questioned, he said, "Everyone needs a last meal, right?" But the real twist came in trial. Witnesses disappeared. Evidence files went missing. One juror claimed she was followed home twice. Rumors swirled that Jacko had friends on both sides, cops who owed him favors, gang members who feared crossing him. Despite clear DNA and 3 testimonies, the jury hung. Mistrial. Jacko walked. He vanished for almost a year. Then, a dismembered body showed up on the hood of a police cruiser in Philadelphia, not thrown, but placed. The message was clear: you thought I forgot. It took federal intervention to bring him down. A RICO case linked him to 8 murders, but still only circumstantial evidence tied him directly. It wasn't until a former girlfriend, terrified and terminally ill, gave up a safe deposit box key that the FBI found his true record. A notebook filled with handwritten victim names, dates, sketches, and finger count notches. 31 kills. He'd drawn them like tally marks, 1 per nail, left hand only. Jacko was sentenced to life without parole in a maximum security penitentiary. But on the day of sentencing, he removed his own left ring finger in the courtroom with a piece of sharpened plastic hidden in his boot and smiled as he bled out on the floor. Guards tackled him. Surgeons saved him. But the message was written in blood, just like the rest of his life. One more to go. Jacko Delaney's incarceration was not the end of his reign. It simply changed the theater. Within months of arriving at Black Ridge Federal Penitentiary, his name became a whispered warning among inmates and staff alike. Jacko didn't seek protection or alliances. He didn't ask for a gang or a bunkmate. Instead, he created an ecosystem of fear rooted in silence. The man never raised his voice, but people moved when he looked their way. Guards began finding mutilated rodents stuffed into lunch trays, razor blades hidden in library books. One inmate, a known extortionist, was found dangling by his shoelaces in the laundry room with no bruises, no defensive wounds, only a paper slip pinned to his chest that read, "Gravity owed me." No one saw Jacko enter or leave the area, but security footage conveniently failed during the window of death. Surveillance glitches became a pattern wherever Jacko moved, and within 6 months, Warden Terrell ordered a lockdown, citing system-wide security failures. But everyone knew it was him. Behavioral analysts were brought in to study his methods, but Jacko played them. During interviews, he'd pose questions instead of answering them. Do you think killers are born? Would you watch someone drown if they deserved it? How many secrets do you think the warden keeps? His sessions ended abruptly when one of the analysts suffered a breakdown, allegedly after finding a drawing of her child's face slipped under her cell door. Jacko had never left his wing. No one could explain how he got the photo. After that, he was placed under permanent observation in a triple reinforced isolation chamber with a 24-hour live camera feed. But the incidents didn't stop. A nurse was found unconscious with a puncture wound in her neck and no memory of the event. A guard reported missing keys that reappeared inside a Bible 3 floors away. Every time Jacko was searched, he was clean. No weapons, no notes. Just his quiet stare and a smirk that made men feel like prey. Then, after a full year in lockdown, Jacko vanished. The camera feed looped for exactly 13 minutes during a routine cell inspection. When the feed resumed, the room was empty. No sign of struggle, no breach, no alarm. He was simply gone. A razor-thin vent cover lay unscrewed near the baseboard, but the opening was too narrow for a man his size. Investigators theorized an inside job, a body double, or an elaborate suicide cover-up. The prison was shut down for 3 days. Dogs swept every corridor, walls were x-rayed, ducts were dismantled. Still, nothing. Weeks later, a detective in Pittsburgh received a package. A shoebox wrapped in plain brown paper, no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid of Jacko smiling in front of a motel room door. Taped to the back was a message. I left the light on for you. The room number matched a motel that had burned down 3 years earlier. Arson, unsolved. To this day, Jacko Delaney is officially listed as presumed deceased, but no body was ever found. Occasionally, urban legends surface, sightings of a man with a limp in rural diners, whispers of unmarked graves found with a left-hand finger missing, barroom tales of a killer who cuts just enough to leave a message. His legacy lives on in cautionary tales told to new recruits, in the hushed briefings of behavioral units, and in the cold stares of prison cells where silence still holds power. Jacko didn't vanish. He evolved. And every time someone gets too loud, someone remembers the note carved into that club promoter's stomach. Now I'm loud. Because Jacko believed in one thing above all. Fear doesn't end when you're gone. It only multiplies. Jacko turned murder into a message, but he was a man who thrived on fear long before the first cut. Our next killer? He wasn't born in the dark. He created it. He didn't want chaos or dominance. He wanted to make the world feel what he felt, ignored, dismissed, small. And so he found victims who reminded him of everyone who once overlooked him and made sure they never did it again. Wesley Cole was invisible most of his life. Born in 1972 in Canton, Ohio, to a single mother who cleaned hospitals at night and drank herself silent by morning, Wesley grew up in the kind of household where the fridge was empty, but the air was full of blame. He was the skinny, quiet kid who never got picked in gym class, the janitor's assistant who people passed in hallways without ever noticing. He graduated high school without a single teacher remembering his name, but he remembered all of theirs. He got his first maintenance job at age 19, unclogging toilets, fixing lights, and scraping gum off concrete in a rundown apartment complex that stank of mold and unpaid rent. He kept his head down. People liked that about Wesley. He didn't talk. He didn't ask questions, but he listened. And over time, he realized something. People shared secrets around him like he wasn't even there. Tenant arguments, late-night affairs, domestic abuse, cops showing up in plain clothes, landlords hiding inspection notices. Wesley took it all in. And in 1996, when he discovered the body of a tenant's dog beaten to death by her drunk boyfriend, something inside him clicked. The next week, that boyfriend went missing. His body was later found inside the building's laundry chute. His spine snapped, bleach poured into his eyes. Police called it gang-related. Wesley was never questioned. He kept sweeping the same floor the next morning. That kill wasn't for thrill. It was Wesley's version of justice. But justice warped quickly. He began to see cruelty everywhere, in how a tenant slammed a door on a delivery man, or in how a woman yelled at her son for spilling juice. And one by one, he decided they had to be cleansed. His method evolved, always in buildings where he worked, always late at night, always involving tools he already had access to. He began staging accidents, electrical shorts that fried a victim mid-shower, stairs sabotaged with oil so someone fell just right to snap their neck, carbon monoxide leaks that suffocated entire families. If he couldn't stage an accident, he improvised. One woman was strangled with an extension cord while she watched TV, then left seated like nothing had happened, the cord tucked neatly behind the couch. Another victim, a man who routinely hit his wife, was found dead in an elevator shaft, his head crushed by machinery Wesley himself had repaired the week before. Wesley began calling these moments cleanups. He kept a logbook, disguised as a maintenance schedule, where he marked each death with a red dot and a single note: restored. Over the years, he bounced from property to property, leaving a trail of unexplained deaths, most ruled accidental. What made him so successful was his methodical nature. He never used the same trick twice in the same building, always tampered with evidence before authorities arrived, and made sure to leave no trace of forced entry. Tenants often reported him as helpful, polite, a little odd, but reliable. His toolbox became his kill kit: wire cutters, gloves, mini gas canisters, industrial bleach, and a collection of screwdrivers sharpened to stabbing points. He began carving initials onto the rubber handles, not of his victims, but of people who had mocked him growing up. A bully, a teacher, a neighbor. Every tool had a name. Wesley didn't just kill who he saw, he killed who he remembered. The murders picked up speed between 2002 and 2007. 12 unexplained deaths across 4 different apartment complexes, all in Northeast Ohio. A pattern emerged only when a young detective named Lena Hartley, whose mother had died in one of the buildings, reopened the case files and noticed the same maintenance contractor had signed off on all inspections within 72 hours of each death. She followed the trail to Wesley, who was then working at a retirement home in Dayton. But when she arrived to question him, he was gone, vanished. His locker had been emptied, his apartment cleaned out. But one thing remained: a sealed manila envelope taped to his tool bench. Inside were 3 Polaroids, each of a different elderly resident, each dated a week apart. On the back of each photo was a note: they were cruel when young. Now they rest. The final picture was dated 3 days into the future. Detective Hartley rushed to the retirement home. She found the last woman, a frail former school principal, alive but confused. A search of the building uncovered a booby-trapped oxygen system in her room that would have released gas while she slept. It was deactivated just in time. Wesley had planned one final restoration, but Hartley's pursuit disrupted the ritual. A nationwide manhunt began. Flyers, news broadcasts, reward money. But Wesley had lived invisible his entire life. Disappearing was easy. No fingerprints, no credit cards, no digital trail. All authorities ever found was a public library computer history showing he'd looked up train routes heading west. Rumors place him in Utah, working under a fake name in a motel. Others say he was found in a fire-damaged house in Nebraska, burned beyond recognition, but with a red-dotted notebook nearby. None were confirmed. Wesley Cole, the maintenance man, became the ghost of broken boilers and flickering hallway lights. And for years after, tenants across Ohio would file work requests with shaky hands, checking behind doors, afraid that the man who made things work again might come back and unplug them permanently. Wesley's disappearance didn't end the story, it made it bigger. Once the media picked up on the apartment deaths and the red dot signature left on the backs of maintenance logs, the country split into two camps. Those who thought Wesley Cole was a ghost story, like a janitor's version of the Zodiac Killer, and those who believed he was still alive, quietly cleaning up people he thought were filthy enough to die. Internet forums lit up with theories. Reddit threads detailed maps of his movements, comparing case files across Midwest states, debating which tools he might have used for specific killings. But beneath the fascination was fear, real fear. People stopped trusting their maintenance workers. Calls to management offices surged every time a light bulb flickered or a garbage chute jammed. Elderly tenants in old buildings were suddenly reporting sounds at night. Soft footsteps, faint whistling, the clank of a toolbox outside their door. Some say Wesley was spotted in Illinois, working at a roadside motel where 2 residents died of carbon monoxide poisoning despite recently replaced detectors. Others believe he made it to Arizona, where a nursing home reported 3 silent suffocations, each with oxygen tubes tied in precise double knots, a trick no staff admitted to using. Authorities never confirmed any of these cases. There were no prints, no footage. But one pattern kept returning, the red dot, sometimes drawn on a napkin, sometimes burned into wood, once even stitched into a pillowcase thread. Wesley's spiral likely began before his vanishing act, though. Police later recovered journals from his abandoned unit, buried inside the walls behind insulation. Inside were hundreds of pages filled with small, perfect handwriting, each line a record of someone's perceived cruelty. He laughed when I dropped my tray. She told me to sweep faster. They whispered about my limp. Some pages were just names, dates, and building numbers. Some were confessions. I cut the brake line at midnight. I poured the oil myself. I watched her fall. But the scariest entries weren't about death. They were about admiration. Wesley idolized silence, structure, and systems. He wrote that a building was like a body. Pipes were veins, walls were bones, doors were choices. He believed every structure had rot somewhere. His job wasn't just to fix, it was to cleanse. When people made a structure worse, when they yelled, stole, hit, humiliated, he believed they became the rot. And rot, he said, had to be scraped clean before it spreads. His emotional decay deepened with isolation. Every kill further detached him from human empathy. He no longer saw people as individuals, only as failures of design. He began marking victims not by names but by type. Type D3, violent maternal. Type S1, indirect abuser. Type T2, attention-seeking parasite. It was like a mechanic cataloging broken parts before tossing them. Experts who studied his case said he was a classic sociopath with obsessive-compulsive tendencies, but others disagreed. A small group of profilers argued that Wesley wasn't just mentally ill, he was spiritually corrupted. They pointed to the increasing ritualism in his kills. Perfect symmetry in body placement, patterns carved behind outlets, locks disassembled and rearranged as puzzles. One investigator found a corpse seated upright in a chair, hands folded, facing an unplugged TV. On the screen was static, but taped to the glass was a note. Tried to change the channel, he wouldn't listen. By 2012, more than 40 deaths across 7 states were suspected to be his doing. But with no DNA, no eyewitnesses, and no digital record, every case stalled. Meanwhile, Wesley's legend grew darker. A podcaster covering cold cases claimed she received an unmarked package with a sharpened screwdriver and a red ink note. "You missed one." The screwdriver matched the exact model used in one of the Dayton murders. A Chicago schoolteacher claimed she saw him watching her from the corner of a hallway while she waited for her apartment elevator. The man was gone within seconds. But what made her sure? She said he was holding a mop with a red string tied around the handle, just like the one her deceased neighbor used to joke about before she died in an accidental fall. The mop disappeared from the janitor's closet that same day. No cameras, no prints, just silence. Wesley had, in essence, become the manifestation of unresolved guilt in urban living. His story lingered in the air like mildew, especially for the overlooked, the lonely, the isolated. He forced people to look twice at the ones they ignored. He made society nervous about the quiet ones. And for a brief moment, every hallway echo sounded like judgment. It's unknown whether he's dead, in hiding, or simply done. Maybe he found what he called a balanced building, a place where no one was cruel enough to fix. Or maybe, in some anonymous basement, a man is still polishing his tools, checking vents, and waiting. Not for orders, not for vengeance, but for the next rot to reveal itself. Because Wesley Cole didn't see himself as a killer, he was a cleaner, and the world, just one long broken pipe. Some killers vanish into myth, others haunt systems, but there are some who weaponize rage so raw, so immediate, that every act feels like a live wire snapping in a rainstorm. These are the ones who don't study blueprints or hide in shadows. They walk right into chaos and set fire to it, just to feel the heat reflect back. After Wesley's clinical silence, Darnell Huxley was noise incarnate, a thunderclap that ripped through Florida's criminal underbelly with unapologetic vengeance and the precise intent to make people bleed for their choices. Darnell Huxley wasn't born to be a killer. He was built into one, piece by piece, blow by blow. Florida's foster system was his first cage, rotating homes, absent files, and caregivers who confused discipline with domination. By the age of 12, he had a broken wrist, a permanently chipped tooth, and a psychological file thicker than his school records. But it wasn't the beatings that broke him. It was the silence that came after, the apologies that never landed, the justice that never arrived, the neighbors who looked away. By 15, he'd stopped crying. By 16, he'd stopped speaking altogether. But inside, something had been fermenting, a silent kind of rage, distilled by years of helplessness, pressure cooked in bureaucratic indifference. He didn't want to lash out. He wanted to erase. Not just punish the wicked, but annihilate them from memory. His first kill wasn't even investigated as one. It was 1999, in Tallahassee. A former group home supervisor, Greg Tillman, was found in his trailer, dead from a grinder mishap. The scene was ugly, blood mist on the walls, bone fragments in the sink, and fingers partially fed into a still-running bench grinder. It looked like a tragic accident. No signs of forced entry. But what no one noticed was the note taped under Tillman's desk drawer. It read, "You called it tough love, I just called it tough." Signed only with a lowercase d. 2 months later, another death. This time, a retired prison guard who'd moonlighted at a juvenile detention center where Darnell once stayed. This one was staged as a heart attack, but toxicology showed traces of scopolamine, a compound not easily accessed unless you knew which plants to extract it from. Police flagged it as suspicious but lacked motive or suspects. The case went cold. Darnell didn't target randomly. He moved with surgical precision, cross-referencing names from his past with known locations. He dug through online public records, obituary databases, and social security trace tools. Each victim had made a mark on him. Some were abusers, some were enablers, some just laughed when they shouldn't have. By 2004, the death toll reached 6, each man or woman linked to his foster care past. Each murder completely different in method but identical in emotional intent. No mercy, no messages, just removal. Then came the shift. Darnell's methods grew bolder, less quiet. In Jacksonville, he lured an ex-youth pastor to a fake volunteer gig by posing as a church administrator. The man arrived expecting to counsel troubled teens. Instead, he found himself zip-tied to a chair in a storage unit lined with thick plastic sheets. Darnell's weapon was a flathead screwdriver, chosen, he later said, for its familiarity. He stabbed the man 17 times, then paused halfway through to change the radio station playing in the background. "I didn't want him to die to something he liked," he later wrote. Police discovered the body 2 days later, posed with a "pray for me" pin jabbed into his tongue. Surveillance footage showed nothing. Cameras had been cut. Entry was clean. Darnell had studied the layout 2 weeks prior by posing as a locksmith apprentice. He was methodical, always 10 steps ahead. But he wasn't killing just to settle scores anymore. He was evolving, targeting individuals who fit psychological profiles that mirrored his past abusers. He sought out correctional officers, parole board members, even self-help authors who specialized in disciplining troubled boys. One such author was found dead in a motel bathtub in Tampa, wrists slit, eyes wide open, and pages from his own book stuffed into his throat. The coroner said he drowned in his own blood. No fingerprints were found. Just a matchbook from a local bar with "still tough enough" scribbled inside. Darnell left clues when he wanted to, but they weren't for the police. They were for himself. His journals, later uncovered in a hidden compartment under a floorboard in a Miami apartment, were chilling in their clarity. He referred to his victims as failures of correction. He wrote about the moment a child breaks inside, how it looks, how it sounds, how it stays. "Pain," he wrote, "isn't the part you remember. It's when you realized no one cared that you were in pain. That's the part that turns you into something else." His writing was poetic, sometimes even beautiful, but beneath the lines lay a hatred so deeply rooted that it no longer needed faces to survive. His targets blurred into archetypes: father figures who shamed him, wardens who ignored his bruises, counselors who told him to man up. Darnell's emotional precision was what made him so terrifying. He didn't kill in fits of rage. He planned, timed, and executed. Each victim was stalked for weeks, their routines memorized, weaknesses mapped. He'd sabotage cars to create stranded situations, then appear as a helpful bystander. He'd pose as an Uber driver with clone decals and lured a parole officer under the guise of a pre-scheduled pickup. That officer was never found. Only his badge, mailed to the parole board in a manila envelope filled with ash. The FBI joined the case by 2007, dubbing him the Burnback Killer, due to his practice of sending symbolic remains of his victims back to the systems they once served. He once left a charred dog collar at a CPS regional office. Another time, a lock of hair tied with a shoelace at the gates of a private boys' school. But for every message, there were 5 murders with no warning. He was playing a dual game, expressive and controlled, theatrical and invisible. It was clear he wasn't trying to be caught, but it was also clear he was unraveling. The kills became closer together. He moved south to Naples, then inland toward Lake Okeechobee. Reports of a man matching his description surfaced in diner CCTV footage, pawnshop transactions, and public libraries. But each time police arrived, he was gone. In one chilling case, he left behind a trail of dead ends, literally. 3 men, all former employees of a now-defunct boys' detention center, were found in separate locations across Florida within the same 48-hour period. One drowned in his own backyard pool. One was found suffocated in his garage. The last was discovered hanging from a tree with a photo of a young Darnell duct taped to his chest. The message was loud: "You knew me, and you did nothing." Still, he made mistakes. A partially burned fingerprint was lifted from a bottle in one scene. A stray surveillance frame caught the edge of his jawline. The FBI released a composite sketch in 2011, but by then, Darnell was already gone. Some say he crossed into Georgia. Others think he died in the Everglades, where one of his early victims had left him for dead as a teen runaway. His final letter, mailed to a journalist who had interviewed one of his surviving childhood friends, was simple. It read, "No child forgets what silence sounds like." Then, nothing. No more deaths, no more ash, just silence, as if he had folded himself into it. By 2012, Darnell Huxley's trail was no longer one of vengeance. It was a gallery of psychological warfare. Gone were the symbols meant only for systems. Now his murders became deeply personalized, deliberate spectacles staged with poetic cruelty. He had grown addicted not only to the kill, but to the emotional collapse that followed, especially among institutions. He began targeting small-town precincts, parole officers nearing retirement, former youth counselors now living quiet lives far from Florida. His most gruesome scene unfolded in Homestead, where a retired juvenile therapist, Robert K., was discovered in his garage, his chest carved open, and within it, sealed in vacuum-packed plastic, were childhood drawings that authorities would later trace back to Darnell's early foster records. The level of control and surgical execution unnerved even veteran homicide detectives. "This wasn't rage," one officer said. "This was theater." In parallel, Darnell started building a digital footprint, not to get caught, but to warn. He hacked into the website of a nonprofit that advocated for troubled boys, replacing their homepage with a single phrase, "How many of us have to become monsters before you ask who built them?" It was traced to a proxy server routed through 5 countries. No leads. But it was enough to suggest he hadn't disappeared. He was evolving into something more ideological, a force rather than a fugitive. His manifesto, discovered only after his presumed death, revealed how far he had gone. It wasn't stored on a laptop or mailed to the press. It was embedded in the metadata of an image sent anonymously to a foster reform blog. The image showed a broken belt buckle, identical to one Darnell was photographed wearing at age 9. The metadata contained 47 pages of text. The writing spoke of systems as factories and boys as parts, repaired, replaced, or scrapped. Darnell claimed he wasn't trying to be remembered. "I want to erase what they made," he wrote. "Not for me. For the next one, they silence." These messages, while chilling, were layered in pain that was both profound and methodical. Yet law enforcement wasn't moved by philosophy. They were chasing a killer, and that killer had started making mistakes. One of his intended victims in Ocala, a former Corrections Academy instructor, fought back. He survived 2 stab wounds and described his attacker in vivid detail. Mid-30s, tall, calm voice, gloves on, surgical mask. But what sealed the link was the weapon, a sharpened metal file, identical to ones missing from a nearby vocational school Darnell had briefly attended under an alias. DNA on the handle matched that of a partial print found years earlier on a bottle from a Tampa motel killing. For the first time, they had confirmation. It was the same man. A coordinated task force, state and federal, was formed. His known aliases were cross-referenced with travel